Okay, welcome, James Duff and Julia Morrison. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
My
Pleasure to be
pleasure to
here.
be here.
All right, so let's start off with just you introducing yourselves. Who are you, and what do you want people to know about you?
Go ahead.
My name is Julia Morrison, and
James Duff.
we are partners in film and in life.
hmm
And
Still in both. Paper Day Productions is our production company.
and our biggest claim to fame is an indie feature we made called Hank and Asha, which is a micro-budget, long-distance, cross-cultural romance. And we had a great experience working in the Constellation Incubator.
Hooray.
Because like many of us, it's taken a while to get our next project off the ground. And there was a lot of learning, and we are now deep in prep for our next project.
And a lot of connection at the incubator, valuable sharing things with other. That was probably the biggest thing we got, is sharing things with the other filmmakers. It was very inspiring and educational. Yeah. And so where should we even start?
Well,
Okay.
I have questions beyond.
Oh, okay. We have questions. Okay.
That's
I
who
was
you
gonna start rolling.
are. Yeah, so could you describe your experience in Constellation Incubator?
You start with this one.
Okay, so it was a really valuable experience because we were challenged to rethink the way that we thought about making movies and actually who we were making them for. And are we making them for themselves? Are we making them for an audience? And I think like the empathy, we had empathy interviews where we were assigned to go out and actually talk to the public, producers, filmmakers, and the audience about what going to films meant to them. And we discovered that as an audience, they really, across the board, filmmaker, producer, audience member, they wanted an experience. They wanted to go to the movies to have an experience. And I think that was a huge takeaway from us. It's that we're making movies for an audience, or an audience experience. So I'm talking, so go ahead.
And for us, one of the other most resonant takeaways of our incubator experience was actually learning about the design thinking process.
Yeah.
And the ways in which that both shook us up as filmmakers, but also just kind of in life. And this whole sort of idea of generating a lot of ideas and using tools like yes and.
Never no, it's always yes, which is awesome.
But this sort of core idea of generating a lot of ideas and then finding where the energy is among those ideas, and then very quickly iterating a design, not having time to perfect it, and then share it with other people.
Key is the time. Having no time is such a key.
And so over the course of the experience of the incubator, we, at first on this very small scale within our groups, were coming up with an idea in like 45 minutes and then having to present it to the rest of our cohort.
Yeah.
And then as the experience went along, we were then sharing our bigger ideas with people that we'd done interviews with. And I think it was, for me, that was a really radical experience to not perfect something and be encouraged to just keep generating ideas and getting feedback on them before you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the culture of the film, of indie film, of creative process in general is you're so invested in wanting your thing to succeed that you want to make it perfect before you share it with anybody. And so it's that was a really big takeaway for me, was shifting a process around iterating and sharing and getting feedback and then tweaking and not waiting until you perfect it.
And that we apply that to our latest project because it's getting off the ground very quickly. And we're not sitting there perfecting it, which we did in the last project, which could take years. And so it's really, we're applying it right now, which has been very helpful. It's get the ideas out, don't be judgmental, let's just do it. So we should see our writing on the wall. We have this big board with all these ideas, scroll down. It's we just write them. We don't care, we don't erase them. So anyway, very cool.
That's amazing. So there's so much I want to unpack in there, but so I'm going to go in reverse order. I happen to know that you have applied design thinking more broadly than just in your next film project. Can you talk about that?
About life.
Well, we so one of the sort of stages in the incubator was or I guess you and the team sort of created a challenge statement, like what were we designing for in the indie film sphere. And afterwards, we were so inspired by this process that we applied it to our own life, and we came up with a challenge statement for like, how do we actually want to live our life? And so like in so doing, we were then applying the idea of end users to like the other things we want to do and how we live our life, not just like the idea of somebody who sees a film. And it was super generative, because when you start having specific ideas around this idea of end user, whether that's like, you know, a student or a traveler or a family member or whatever, like that you can sort of design for an end user from a place of empathy, like has opened up our whole sort of personal life design.
Yeah, and you could say we were kind of stalled during COVID, like everybody else, and depressed and sad, and this really kind of jump started us out of it and opened the world so many possibilities that, oh, we can do this and design for people who need it. I think that was a big key. End users, like what people need. So yeah.
I love that. And sort of using that to get back to what Jim said about audiences, about like thinking about it as the audience want. One of the biggest insights that I took away from this summer was how little we often ever think of the audience as the end user in film. Like as indie filmmakers, you're kind of always like trying to design for Sundance or trying to design for an agent, or, you know, and like to shift and be like, wait a minute, who are we making films for? We're making films for audiences. What do they need? And actually to engage with them. Can you talk a little bit about how that shifted your thinking as a filmmaker?
Well, like, I mean, for me, thinking about the audience was somehow like an icky, dirty idea of like of designing a marketing, like designing a widget that you are then trying to like
selling out,
market to somebody and convince them they need a thing that they don't really need, or like, I don't know, it was sort of framed in a different way, and I didn't really think of it as part of the creative process. And like the most radical takeaway for me from the incubator is exactly this. It's this idea that that the audience longs for an experience, and part of like what we're doing as storytellers is delivering an experience. And yes, maybe we're processing our personal trauma, or, you know, like getting in touch with our demons, or, you know, I don't know, all the millions of reasons we tell stories. Yes, all of that is true and important, and like how you tell an authentic story. And who are you telling it to, you know, and why? And so like, it has been a radical shift for us in the project that we're working on now, to have this always at the front of our mind.
Yeah.
And like one specific example is like, you know, you're auditioning a million ideas, you're developing your story, it could go a million different ways. And like thoughts will pop into our head around, if we kind of take a risk here and go in an unexpected direction, and this like character starts embodying someone and therefore puts on oldie timey clothes, like we could like steer ourselves in a direction where this is now a movie that you dress up in oldie timey clothes to go see, for example. You know, like that the awareness around like taking risks that's then going to lead to a style of storytelling that's then going to lead to a unique experience is a big shift.
But also for me, it's getting over the idea of selling out. Like I think when you're an indie filmmaker, if it's for the audience, oh, I'm selling out. And from day one, like in film school, oh, don't make it for the audience. You can't think of that. You got to think of yourself. Tell your own stories. And yeah, I'm not going to use bad language, but that's bullshit, you know? And it's just, it is about the audience. It's making the connection. And that for me was really kind of hard to like get away from, because that's what it is about. And I guess I'm so much happier thinking about making a product that people want to see, and then that will share. Yeah,
Imagine that.
imagine. But honestly, for indie filmmakers, I think that's a huge thing, is the idea of selling out by making it for an audience.
And
Good.
Go ahead.
well, I mean, I think many of us sort of have a sense of like, if we wanted to make a parody of an indie film, of like, of a film where like
Nobody says anything.
nobody says anything or does anything, and they drive around in cars, and they, you know,
Right, the last shot, they're staring out the window in the bus.
you know, or whatever. And like, that's actually important to kind of reckon with.
Yeah.
That that stereotype of like the sincere personal indie film. And we are now at a moment also like enlightened by our incubator experience, that like we are trying to break away from that and think about creating something that someone wants to see.
Yeah. And also, if you're scared to interview for the empathy interviews, it makes you nervous, maybe that's a weird idea. You know what I mean? To share you should be open to sharing your ideas. And before we weren't, I think it really busted out of that too.
Yeah.
Because that was kind of scary, like, ooh, sharing our ideas with other people and getting feedback right away. But
because it's tender,
it's
right?
tender.
Like the creative process is
it's
tender.
very tender, but it's actually very helpful.
I've always resisted
Totally.
Sharing too soon.
Yeah.
And so this has been a really positive challenge to like break that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting space that film occupies, right? Because it is art and commerce, because it's such expensive art that it's like, how do you, because I think at the core of what they're saying at Indie Film School is like, you can't write for the audience independent of some kind of
yes,
that's true, right? That is
yes.
art is, but
and yes,
and yes, and unless you have a trust fund or somebody who will just infinitely write you checks to make whatever movies you want, there comes a point where you have to start making money, which means that people have to see that, people have to watch it.
Well, and it's like, I mean, all of this is driven by personal taste, right? And like, I could say the same thing about visual art, about paintings in a museum. Like, I personally love paintings that I can see the painting and have an experience and feel moved without having to go read the panel that tells me what this is about and what I'm supposed to think or whatever. And so it's like all of the above is great. And like everybody navigates their way through this in a way that fits them.
Yeah.
And I think like what our experience of this summer has been is like clarifying for ourselves what we're in it for, right? Like, what do we want to be doing it for?
Yeah.
And we want to be doing it to make a connection with an audience. And that has become like that was clarified and galvanized by the experience.
Well, talking about painters too, the torture painter like Van Gogh, and my favorite is Miro. And I love his art, but also I was reading about him, and he makes art to bring joy to people. That's why he does it. Like, how many painters have you read say that? He's making his art to bring joy to people. I almost cried when I read that, because that's kind of what it's about, right? And that's our mission statement, and we connected with that. But the importance of that reason to do it. And anyway, that kind of breaks out of the stereotype too of the tortured painter. I mean, he's doing it for joy. It's like awesome, Anyway.
Totally. Yeah. And I loved what you said about like we clarified why we were doing it, because that's the thing to me is like, I feel like that is why most filmmakers get into making, because they want to tell stories and have an impact on people, and whether it's joy or pain or whatever they want to do. But then we get sort of sidetracked into this weird like space of don't pay attention to the audience, pay attention to the people, the gatekeepers, and like, what are you going to do to please them? And for some people that is the path they want to pursue, but just to know why, the fact that it's such a revelation to ask ourselves who we care about personally in the filmmaking process is kind of indicative to me of how off track the whole thing has gotten.
Well, isn't it strange that that's revolutionary to say that?
Right.
I mean, how weird is that? It's revolutionary for the audience. Whoa.
And yes, and
Yes,
at this,
and.
like at the same time in all of this, like another big takeaway from the conversations we had with peers in the incubator was this whole sort of question of like, are you prioritizing outcome or process in terms of like all of the other soft things of like the experience of making the film as a collaborative group creative experience and blah, 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 blah. And like, and as much as it's been a shift for us to really be anchoring ourselves in this idea of designing for an audience, at the same time, above anything else, it's like, I think what we really heard in the group was the importance of prioritizing process, because ultimately you can't control how the thing's going to come out in the end, no matter what you try to do, how good your script is, and you know how much money you have, blah 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 blah. But like you can design the experience that you create on your set and how you collaborate with your peers and creating, you know, safe set, like all of these sorts of other things, which like ultimately on our next project, hopefully it will connect with an audience, blah, 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 blah. But like where we're really anchored and like feeling good about an experience is like, did people making the movie with us like have a good time? Like, did we create opportunities for other people to also express themselves creatively and contribute to a group, you know, piece of, you know, all of those sorts of things ultimately are the most important, I think.
Well, and the values, when we discuss those with all the other filmmakers in the incubator across the board, was making connection. I think everybody said goals to make connection. And that's what's kind of missing, is that like that connection is that's what we all want. And how do we make it happen? And I guess the only way you can do it is the process, you know, and then hopefully that'll take care of itself. But that is kind of the end game, is the connection. And sadly, I think that's kind of missing, you know, a missing part of what we're doing is that. And it leaves us like yearning to make that happen. And the incubator really helped us focus on, okay, it's a process. It's what we can do. There's goals and expectations. We can make the goal to make the film. We can't expect anything else. And that's hard to process that. But I think that helped us kind of make that more of a reality in what we're doing.
Well, and something that, like, another thing that you're touching at that I took away was in our white supremacist patriarchal culture, there's this saying, the means are the end, or the that the end justifies the means, right? So whatever is
Whatever it takes.
right? This like genius vision to the screen, like however many people are traumatized or hurt, you know, mistreated or whatever, like it doesn't matter because the ends justify the means. And what one of the takeaways from the summer was that the means are actually the ends. Like how you build the DNA of something does actually impact what the end is.
Right.
You're saying this about centering community and connection in the filmmaking process. My hypothesis, although we'll only see this play out hopefully as people try, you know, people like you try this, is that if you center that in production, will that actually play out and cause that to be centered in distribution? And does that actually do the thing that audiences are longing for?
I believe that to
I
be
do too.
true.
I do too.
And what I also strongly believe to be true is that it's creating the circumstances for everyone to do their best creative work, and that like all of the ephemeral magic that happens when a group of people get together and collaborate on something like sparks when all of these, you know, when the terms of engagement are healthy and kind and not like much less hierarchical than the sort of standard film set culture typically is.
You know, our catchphrase is be kind, just be kind, and everything else takes care of itself. You know what I mean? People want to work with you if you're kind, and then that energy just goes forward. So
we only have a few minutes left, but you started this film project, I think during or after the incubator, you were like, okay, this is happening, we're going. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're thinking differently about this project, what this project is?
So the main way that we're like, one of the big things is that we're going to start before we're ready.
It's not going to be perfect.
And we have set a date to shoot this in the spring, and we haven't actually finished the script yet.
If we have 8 cents or $8 million, we're shooting this thing.
And it's terrifying
Yes,
and exhilarating all at the same time. We really were sort of stuck in a period of like the hamster wheel thing of like a good thing happens and somebody's interested and then wait. And then, you know, this sort of endless waiting game cycle. And so our number one commitment is to not do that.
Just make it.
And just do it. And so like, and to take the risk of like, it may not work out that well because we're not going to be super well prepared.
But I think you have to trust yourself, and we trust ourselves. It's going to happen, and we just got to get rid of the censor if it's not perfect. And I think if you trust yourself, it just happens. You know, I mean, that's faith, but yeah, I totally believe that, and I think we're kind of running on that.
And we're partnering with a collaborator, and this is also, which is not something that we've done in this same way before, and it's like, there's this sort of beautiful mess of like, just like, you know, we're all committed to the fact that we're going to do this and none of us know what it's going to look like. But like, we feel like we have a team.
Yeah.
And she lives in the place where we're in North Carolina, where we're going to shoot the film. And it's like, we're all bringing in different things. And one of the things that she's bringing in is like a deep connection to place and creating an experience for her network of people in this place to also collaborate with us on the project. So that's like a big experiment. And we sort of have this, we're working towards this idea of like, we think we're making a movie that people are going to want to see, but that can be exhibited in a non-traditional, like event anchored, experiential anchored way. And who knows how that'll go, but like, it feels exciting to kind of have that in the driver's seat more.
And also the incubator inspired us to work with the community. Like our group was big on that, and working with the community. It's very specific in Carolina, and having that a big important part of the film, but also what goes into the film. And we're leaving it a lot open for that interpretation of what the people bring to it, of the area. So that was inspired by the incubator as well.
Amazing. I can't wait to see what happens with all of this. So exciting.
It's the grand experiment.
It is, but hopefully
like, why not?
It's iterate. It's also this idea of like iterate often and radically, which is so hard to do in this world. And you get stuck in a thing where years, you know, like you're invested in something for a really long time, and it doesn't allow you to then tweak the experiment. And so like, we're just trying to like make something so that we can learn from it and then make something else.
Well, my good buddy is a producer, and we meet like once a week, once every 2 weeks, and he has like 3 projects, but nothing ever happens. It's like waiting for this person, waiting for this agent, waiting for this person to read it. And it's like 3 years and he's never made anything. And it's like, we were like a year and a half in this other project waiting for all these people. And like Julia says, let's just make it. I mean, that's the trouble with the industry, is waiting for everybody. Like you brought up the gatekeepers, and we're going to gate our own keep.
You're going to choose yourself. Okay, we have to wrap up, but where can people find out more about you and your work?
The name of our company is Paper Chain Productions. www.paperchainproductions.com. And our film, Hank and Dasha, is on Amazon Prime.
There you go. It has its own separate website too, hankandasha.com. So that's how you find us.
So much for this.
And thank you, Naomi, and all of the members of the team.
So inspiring and such a wonderful thing.
We really can't say enough how like impactful the experience
and how inspiring. We often bring up like what a wonderful thing you guys have done. So thank you very much. And now we're going to make it happen.
Yes.